every story has a specific visual identity. Every story has a specific visual grammar. And part of your job as a filmmaker is to kind of get under the hood and try and figure out what the most appropriate visual grammar is for rendering a particular story. Not every story needs to be told or should be told in a series of long, unbroken takes, but it became apparent from a very early stage that the holy grail in executing this episode was going to be trying to remove as best as possible any barrier between the viewer and the subjective experience of Will Reeves, as portrayed by Jovan Adepo, Lou Gossett Jr., and Regina King, all actually playing versions of this same character. It's subjectivity layered on top of subjectivity, which, if executed properly, can hopefully lead to a very immersive viewer experience, and hopefully a very sort of emotional one as well.
Hey! Pardon me, officer.
When Stephen first presented the idea, he just said Birdman. My understanding of what he meant was, yes, Birdman is constructed as a continuous and uninterrupted take or shot. But more importantly, there's a subjective intensity to Birdman, like a stress, because there are no cuts. And particularly because of what the subject matter of this material was. And because Angela is in many ways a captive audience, she's literally inside her grandfather's body. So the storytelling itself and the way in which the story is told requires like kind of an in-your-face intensity.
These are curated memories, but strung together in a coherent sequence. And it felt to me like the best way to render the sensation or the experience of memories was to create a visual landscape that felt fluid, unbroken, continuous, seamless, because when I reflect on my own experience of memories, that's what they feel like. There are very little demarcations between scenes in my head or in my imagining. What you're left with at the end of an immersion in the experience of memory is an overall kind of impression of a complete experience, not necessarily segmented into discrete portions, but one stream of consciousness.
My shadow and me.
I was going to try to avoid handheld for a lot of it, if possible, because the energy and the motion of a camera will be very instructive as to the point of view. And so it'll also be very important for just how you feel in a scene. Like the opening shot of the sequence when we get into the dream, you know, Angela sits back into the seat and she plunks down and she's dressed as the young officer and she's young Will Reeves getting their badges, right? They're all sort of on stage for all the cadets. And that feel of a slowly floating crane really felt sort of like this weirdly dreamlike passage through something, even though we weren't really in a point of view. We were like, where are we? We were sort of like experiencing all this. And that was one of the earlier things we designed, and that sort of anchored like how we might approach this. If you move the camera slowly and deliberately, it does two things. One, it allows the audience to really observe, and you don't start to expect a cut all the time, and so you start to really pay attention to what you're looking at, feeling more like you're in the scene, which is part of the point of view process. And then we would try to figure out at the time when we would have to build a jump time, how we'd come up with elegant, you know, transitions, either jump cuts or cuts on a pan, things like that would allow us to stitch things together or allow us to at least, you know, keep the same continuous feel. One thing that's great about the way Damon writes is he does write in a way which the scenes always have shifts in energy and pace, and there's always a surprise or a joke or a dramatic moment. It's not a very, you know, monotone, even situation. It's very fluid. It's very much like music. By doing this with the camera and cutting the takes together, you can sort of really watch the scene and go, okay, well, this is, now we can come up with more energy here. We come all the way down and he slams shut on the file folder. And on the slam of the action, it was like, well, it'd be nice to cut to the next scene with a bit of action, like going with it, which was the toy being kicked by the foot and then coming off and revealing this next thing. The feeling of walking with him all the time, sort of always anchoring the entire scene with young Will, allowed us to kind of go inside and be true point of view sometimes and pull out and still always feel like you're with him. You're always feeling like it's his experience.
About time you showed up.
What happened here?
Same thing that always happens when you put a bunch of animals in the same cage. Go on in. You need someone who speaks their language.
We planned really rigorously. We got the script and I took the director of photography, the production designer, the stand-ins, and a number of other key crew elements to Macon, Georgia, which is the town that we shot the bulk of this episode in. And I shot a version of this entire episode on an iPhone and edited it and looked at all the transitions and looked at these extended takes and assessed how it was all working. And then I went back and I did it again and got a really clear sense of how the whole piece was coming together. So that by the time we eventually went to Macon with the full crew and the cast, we had a very, very strong template for how the scene should be staged and put on their feet.
So we did go through this elaborate rehearsal process of trying to basically pre-visualize the entire episode. And then you can actually look at them and say, does that just feel right? Because we were not going to be able to shoot a lot of versions of things, a lot of different edits. We were going to have to really decide what the shot was going to be, how we would choreograph all of the action within the scene for the shot, what could be off camera, what couldn't be. And then we could also add those together, just stitch them all in a row in the office and sort of preset, okay, does that feel right? And then, okay, this is too long, or this feels too short, or maybe we can put a cut in here and just work all that before. Because once we did all that, I have to then technically design it like it's just going to be a crane, Steadicam, or a handheld or a gimbal, or we'll pass the camera from one operator to another, things like that.
Something here inside cannot be denied.